Hello, and welcome to your Chemistry 1412 lecture over coordination compounds, isomers, and d orbital splitting. Isomers can be of a structural or stereoisomer nature. D orbital splitting holds the explanation for the myriad colors which complexes can have. We will look more deeply into each of these topics. Isomers are compounds with the same components but different arrangements of those components. Here are two examples of tetraamine dichlorido-cobalt-3 ion. One has the chlorines attached on opposite sides of the molecule, which is called trans. The other does not, which is called cis. Isomers can be of a structural or stereoisomer nature. There are four different structural isomers: ionization, hydrate, linkage, and coordination. There are two types of stereoisomers: geometric and optical. Let us look at examples of each. The structural isomer called ionization isomers are two or more complexes who have exchanged ligands from outside the complex into the complex. Here we see an example of a cobalt complex which has a bromito ligand swapping places with a sulfate ion. The structural isomer called a hydrate isomer is similar to ionization isomer, only this time a ligand inside the complex is changing places with a water outside the complex. The structural isomer called linkage isomers have the same ligands, but they are attached at different points. There are two ligands which can do this: nitride and thiocyanide. In nitride, the attachment can occur at either the nitrogen or one of the two oxygens. In thiocyanide, as shown here, the attachment can occur at either the sulfur or the nitrogen. The point of attachment is indicated in the name by the Greek letter kappa and then the atom which makes the bond. For instance, the top complex is named tetraamine chlorido thiocyanato kappa N cobalt-3 ion, with the kappa N indicating the attachment of the ligand at the nitrogen. The bottom complex is named tetraamine chlorido thiocyanide kappa S cobalt-3 ion, with the Ks indicating the attachment of the ligand at the sulfur. The structural isomer called coordination isomers are compounds made of two complexes, one ionic and the other cationic. The isomers differ in that they have exchanged ligands from one complex into another, and vice versa. Now we arrive at the second type of isomer, the stereoisomers. The first of the two types of stereoisomers are called geometric isomers. In complexes, the geometric isomers are either square planar or octahedral. They are never tetrahedral. Geometrical isomers differ in the placement of the coordinated ligands, but not the identity. The placement of the ligands, if there are two types, can be either cis or trans. Cis placement means that the ligands, which are the same, are on the same side of the complex. Trans placement means that the ligands, which are the same, are on opposite sides of the complex. The second type of stereoisomer is called optical isomer. An optical isomer can be either tetrahedral or octahedral. Here we see three different complexes and their mirror images. The third complex is an optical stereoisomer and is said to be chiral. Chiral means that the mirror image of the complex is not superimposable onto the original complex. A common example of chirality is your two hands. They are mirror images of each other, yet when you lay them on top of each other, palms down for both, they do not align finger to finger. Another way to think of chirality in reference to these pictures is that the mirror image of the third complex cannot be turned in three-dimensional space to be shown to be identical to the original. The first two are geometrical isomers and are considered to be achiral. They are achiral because the mirror image can be turned in space to be shown to be an identical copy of the original. If a chiral complex has mirror images that are non-superimposable, then these are a pair of enantiomers, also called diastereomers. Enantiomers have wildly different chemical properties, but they have the same physical property except one. They rotate light, so are said to be optically active. White light is a mixture of all wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation from about 400 nanometers violet to about 800 nanometers red. If we remove one of the colors, the light will no longer be white. If we remove red light, then it appears green. Conversely, removing green appears red. In complexes, the color absorbed is the complementary color of what you observe. All light, whether it is perceived by the human eye or not, comes from the de-excitation of electrons from an excited state to a lower energy state. All color perceived is a function of what color or wavelength of light is being absorbed by the observed object. For whichever color is absorbed, the complementary color is observed. In the case of complexes, the wavelength of absorption is set by the energy difference of the d orbitals when they split. There are 5 d orbitals. Due to spatial relationships between the hybridized orbitals and the bonds in the complex, the energy of these 5 d orbitals are broken into 2 levels. Sometimes there are 3 orbitals at a lower energy and 2 orbitals at a higher energy. Sometimes the reverse is true. The energy difference between the 2 levels varies with the identity of the complex. The difference in energy levels between the 2 groups of d orbitals is called d-splitting energy. The study of the relationship between complex color and d-splitting is called crystal field theory. For octahedral complexes, there are 6 ligands donating electrons to the metal ion to form coordinate covalent bonds. The d orbital splits into 2 different levels. The splitting of the d orbitals into different energy levels comes from the electrostatic interactions between the electrons of the ligand and the lobes of the d orbitals. In an octahedral, the bonds are formed along the x, y, and z axes. Any orbital that has a lobe on the axes moves to a higher energy level. 2 of the d orbitals superimpose along axes. These are the 2 which are at a higher energy. In a tetrahedral complex, there are 4 ligands attached to the central metal. For the 2 orbitals with lower energy, orbitals are directed on the axes while the ligands are not. Therefore, the electrostatic interaction is minimized. For the 3 orbitals at higher energy, the bonds of the ligands overlap with the orbitals, and the electrostatic interaction is maximized. In a square planar there are 4 ligands as well. However, the difference is that the electrons of the ligands are only attracted to the xy plane. Any orbital in the xy plane has a higher energy level. There are 4 different energy levels for the square planar. From the highest energy level to the lowest energy level are dx squared minus y squared, dxy, dz squared, and both dxz and dyz. Ligands such as halides are called weak-filled ligands because they cause a relatively small value of delta. Ligands such as ammonia and cyanide are called strong-field ligands because they produce a relatively large value of delta. Different metal ions have different values of delta, and the different values for delta give rise to different colors. The number of d electrons a metal has can help predict whether or not a complex is high spin or low spin. If a metal atom has 3 or less electrons, the complex is always high spin because only the lower energy orbitals can contain electrons according to Hund's rule, regardless of delta. If a metal has 8 or more electrons, the higher energy orbitals must have electrons in them, regardless of delta. Only complexes with 4, 5, 6, or 7 electrons can have different orbital filling patterns depending on delta. This has been your Chemistry 1412 lecture on coordination complexes, isomers, and d-splitting. Please go to your homework and complete any related assignments at this time. If you run into confusion, please ask for help. Help is always available.